So, first of all, Rinpoche will start question and answer. So Rinpoche's got the questions already, and Rinpoche would like to address these questions. And so once they are done, once Rinpoche has gone through all the questions, then Rinpoche will continue with the Four Noble Truths. So whatever Rinpoche remembers with regard to the Four Noble Truths, Rinpoche will continue to teach on that. So the first question is about the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. Rinpoche. So yesterday, Rinpoche talked about the Four Noble Truths and the three kind of aspects: entity, the activity, and the activity that is free, the activity in combination with the result. So we talk about, therefore, these 16 aspects, so the four aspects with regard to the true suffering, and then the four aspects with regard to the true origin, and the four aspects of the true cessation, and the four aspects of the true path. So in that way, each truth's got four aspects, and that amounts to 16 aspects. So first of all, the four aspects of true suffering: impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. Those are the four aspects: impermanent, suffering, empty, selfless. And each one of them's got a reason to talk about them. There's a reason for going through these four. So what is it? The contaminated aggregates, those are samsara. So this is the basis. And this contaminated aggregates, they are impermanent because sometimes they arise, sometimes they go out of existence, so they arise temporarily and change moment by moment. So they just arise temporarily. That's why we say they're impermanent. And then with regard to suffering, well, the four aggregates, the contaminated aggregates, they're in the nature of suffering because they're under the control of contaminated karma and afflictions. Therefore, they're in the nature of suffering. They're controlled by the afflictive emotions. Therefore, we say that that's their aspect. Then empty here, empty, and selfless with regard to these two. Here saying that they're like a self that is permanent, partners, and independent. And then selfless refers to a self that is like lacking a self-sufficient, substantially existent I. So this is based on the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras, the way it's described in Parchen or the Perfectional Wisdom Sutra. So because the contaminated aggregates are empty of a permanent, partners, independent self, therefore we say it's empty. And we say that the five aggregates are selfless. And so, for instance, we talk about also like that there is no creator God, a creator God that is permanent, for instance, that has no parts and exists independently. So that's a way in which we can look at empty. So not just from the point of view of the person, him or herself, but rather from the point of view of a kind of a God, a kind of creator God. Therefore, there's no such a God. There are no contaminated aggregates that are somehow controlled by such a permanent, partners, independent self. In this case, a God or other sentient being, or the person, him or herself. And then likewise, when we say selfless, well, there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent person or I. What is a substantially existent, self-sufficient person? What does it mean to be self-sufficient? As if there... It's not like that there's a self that's independent of the five aggregates that can be looked for. Therefore, there's nothing that controls. There's no separate utilizer of the five aggregates. There's no controller of the five aggregates. Nothing separate existing from the five aggregates. So in our feeling, according to our feeling, it feels like there was, as if there were a different kind of entity. So as it says there's this quote, and it says that there's one of those lines is most important, that there's no utilizer. So when we talk about we talk about beings who have some impairment, some kind of sensual impairment, they cannot see, they cannot hear, and so forth. They are not able to reflect on things. They have mental problems. They forget things all the time. Such a person, in the case of such a person, So these days, scientists, for instance, talk about it, or some other scholars, they would say that this problem can be totally eliminated. They would say this can be eliminated because we can exchange them. We can implant new kind of sense organs and so forth. So there's this idea that all this can be exchanged, that even the mind can be exchanged, that kind of idea. But is that really possible? Can you really exchange the mind? So if it's like one's own mind is not of any use, a sense that we can actually exchange. We can exchange our mind with another person. So that's also the sense of like existing self-sufficiently, as if you could exchange mind and body for the mind and body of another person. So as you can exchange organs, you can take on the organs of another person, as if you could change your own mind for the mind of another person. So this kind of sense. So there's the sense that therefore the self is like some kind of controller, some kind of in charge. And then the five aggregates are controlled by this controller. But in actuality, when we say selfless, it means there is no such self-sufficient, substantially existent self. Therefore, we say, in summary, we say, well, true suffering has four aspects: impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. Why are they taught? What is the reason for teaching them? Because there are four wrong views. Perceiving that which is impure as pure, perceiving that which is the nature of suffering to be happy, perceiving that which is impermanent to be permanent, and perceiving that which doesn't have a self to have a self. So these are the four wrong views with regard to true sufferings. That's why they explained, in order to overcome these four wrong views. So then we definitely have a sense that our five aggregates are pure. We have this familiarity, so we think when we sanitize and when we use some sanitizer, oh, I'm really pure. My hands are totally clean and pure. So there's a sense like my five aggregates can be totally purified, that everything else is dirty, but I'm really pure. A sense that other people are dirty and I'm pure. So we have that kind of sense. So, for instance, when we clean our ears, we clean our face and so forth, feel we're really, really clean and pure. Then also with regard to the nature of phenomena being permanent, we believe our five aggregates are permanent. They always continue. We, of course, think they're in the nature of happiness, and we believe in the self. And so, therefore, in order to overcome these wrong views of purity, happiness, permanence, and the self, well, these four aspects, impermanent, suffering, and so forth, have been described with regard to the true sufferings. And then with the four aspects of the true origin of sufferings: cause, origin, strong producer, and condition. Now, those are the four. And again, as before, so we talk about karma and afflictions. They are causes because in dependence on them, we have the root of suffering. It's because of karma and afflictions that the root of suffering has arisen. Therefore, there's suffering because of our karma, because of our afflictions. We experience the root of suffering. And then, with regard to the origin, well, we talk about we talk about our contaminated karma as well afflictions. They are true origins because they generate sufferings again and again, not just once, but many different kinds of suffering. And then strong producer, condition. The next one is condition. So contaminated karma and afflictions, they are conditions because they're the cooperative conditions. There are many cooperative conditions, so we don't necessarily have a substantial cause, but we have many cooperative conditions which lead to suffering. And in that way, if we talk about this, so when we, for instance, if we plant a seed, for instance, so for instance a rice seed, we'll get a rice sprout and so forth. But it's not sufficient to just have the seed. Just to have a rice seed is not sufficient in order for a rice sprout to arise. So you need other conditions. Cooperative conditions are needed, such as, so first you have the seed itself. So you need the soil, you need water, you need fertilizer, you need warmth, and so forth. So when all these conditions come together, then this seed can actually transform to become a rice sproutling, or a rice seedling, or a rice sprout. So therefore, you have many cooperative conditions. So soil, warmth, water, all these aspects, they are described as cooperative conditions of this particular sprout. So likewise here we say with regard to the true origin, there's a condition, so there are conditions, contaminated karma and afflictions are conditions because they are the cooperative conditions of suffering. And then the last one is strong producer. So it says strong. Why is it strong producer? Because it doesn't just generate suffering, but it generates suffering forcefully. There's this strength, this force behind it. Anyway, so we say contaminated karma and afflictions here with regard to the true origins or the truth of the origin. So they are cooperative conditions. They forcefully generate suffering. They generate the root of suffering, and all kinds of suffering are created again and again. So that is the meaning of the four aspects of the true of the origin. And now, but why are they taught? Why are these four aspects are taught? Well, because they're the four wrong views. There's a sense that suffering has no origin, and that the view that there's something that is permanent by nature but occasionally changes, and that there's only a creator God. That our suffering was generated by a creator God, and that our suffering has only one cause. So these four views of believing there's no origin, there's only one cause, there's a creator God, and that phenomena that our suffering is actually permanent by nature but occasionally changes. Those are the wrong views with regard to those four aspects. So therefore the four are taught. Then you have the next: cessation, pacification, satisfying state, and definite release. So these are the four aspects of the true cessation. So when we say cessation, that's important because suffering is removed. It was there before and now it's removed by means of an antidote. An antidote that is such that which it perceives in terms of its object is the exact opposite of the root misperception of reality. Therefore, it's an antidote. So here the true path, by way of a true path, which is an uninterrupted path and a path of release. Therefore, for instance, you have like the uninterrupted path that eliminates the different obscurations, and you have the path of release, which attains the attainment of that cessation. Therefore, you have an antidote that is such that realizes phenomena directly, or realizes emptiness directly, and on the basis of that, it then eliminates whatever is in the way to becoming liberated, and so forth. So what you're eliminating is the misperception. And the misperception and that which it gives rise to. So this misperception, its object is negated. The opposite of what this misperception perceives, that is what's understood. And based on that understanding, the direct experience of that, you eliminate then the obscurations. You eliminate obscurations and therefore attain the cessation. You attain the cessation of certain obstructions. And therefore, we talk about a cessation, therefore. It's a separation of something that was there previously and is now gone. And then there's pacification. So what is a non-pacified state? Those are the afflictive emotions. So again, by way of an antidote and understanding the opposite of what the misperception perceives, then these obscurations, these misperceptions are pacified. Then you have the satisfied state or the satisfying state. So here satisfying state means everything good comes together. What does it mean here? So when we talk about the elimination of ignorance, that is liberation. So is it possible that we can overcome, we can attain liberation and then lose that liberation again? Well, that's impossible. So once you've attained liberation, it's irreversible. There's no way that you can return from such a state. So this is a satisfying state in such a way that it's permanent. It cannot be changed. It cannot be undone. It's something stable, if you like, irrevocable. It's an irrevocable state. And also it brings benefit and happiness. It brings in that way, well-being and so forth. So this is actually a better explanation. So we experience happiness. That's why we strive for liberation, and therefore in such a state, once we attain liberation, that is a satisfying state. And so, of course, with regard to each obscuration that is being eliminated, that is overcome, there's a certain satisfying state that goes along with that. And lastly, there's definitely release. It's called definite release. So here, actually, the irrevocable liberation should be explained in with regard to the definite release Rinpoche says. So it's certain. There's no way around it. It's certain that you will definitely be released from the obscurations, whatever problems there are. So it's definite. It's indefinite in the sense that your suffering will not return and so forth. And then these 4 antidotes. What are the 4? What are the 4 wrong views basically with regard to true suffering? So that there's no liberation from cyclic existence. That's one wrong view. And that the contaminated states are liberation from cyclic existence. And that which are in the nature of suffering are liberation from cyclic existence. And that although the elimination of suffering is possible, it can also be reversed. Those are the 4 wrong views with regard to the true cessations, which is why these 4 aspects are being taught. And then you have the true path, the 4 aspects with regard to true path or the truth of the path. So there are path, appropriate means, actualizing means, and means for a definite eradication. So what is a path? It refers to, as it's gata gata para gata para samgata buddhya soha, as in the sutra, in the Heart Sutra. This is very important. The first gata describes the path of accumulation. The second gata describes the path of preparation. Then Paragata describes the path of seeing, and Parasamgata describes the path of meditation, and Bodhiya Soha refers to the path of normal learning. So here, these paths can be attained anywhere. So, well, first of all, the truth of the path actually does not refer to the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, because at that stage in general you haven't realized selflessness yet. But once you reach the path, once you reach Paragata, which is the path of seeing, that's when you realize selflessness. Not only do you realize selflessness, you realize it directly. And that's why you have this direct experience of selflessness or of emptiness. That's why you describe that as a true path, a truth of the path, or a true path. So the person who's attained such a path is described as an Arya, a noble being. Why? Because they've realized emptiness or selflessness directly. They experience it directly. They've attained the primordial wisdom, realizing emptiness directly. That's why we distinguish between an ordinary person and an Arya person. So an Arya person is a person who has realized emptiness directly or selflessness directly, having attained that particular wisdom that realizes the ultimate nature of phenomena. So that's a path. That is a true path. So this is a path. This is also an appropriate means. It's an actualizing means, and it's a means for definite eradication. That mind directly realizing emptiness, that path that directly realizes selflessness. So when we say path of seeing, what does it see? What does it actually? It sees it sees liberation. It sees that liberation is possible. The person who's got this kind of mind in their continuum, it sees. Therefore, that's why we say seeing, because of having the sense, oh, liberation is possible once emptiness is realized. So we know that this is an actual true path on the path of seeing. And then with regard to appropriate means, well, it knows the direct antidote to the afflictions. Therefore, we call the path, the wisdom directly realizing selflessness. We call that an appropriate means. And it's also an actualizing means, because it's a pristine wisdom that directly realizes the final mode of existence of phenomena. And because it's an antidote that means for definite eradication. It's a means for definite eradication because it irrevocably eliminates, it eliminates suffering irrevocably. In that way, we talk about these four aspects of the true path. So there are different terms that we use to describe these different aspects. And again, the wrong views with regard to true path. So Geshe Dashi is telling Rinpoche the four wrong views, that there is no. What are the? So Geshe, please help me. So that there's no path to liberation from cyclic existence. That there's sense that the mind that has familiarized itself with selflessness is not an appropriate path to liberation. That worldly meditative concentrations are path to liberation. And that there's no path that eradicates suffering. So these are the wrong views with regard to the true path. And in order to overcome them, this is described. These four aspects with regard to the true path are described. Therefore, we have these 16 aspects of impermanent suffering and so forth. They're described in order to understand the Four Noble Truths better, to understand that the 16 wrong views are actually to be overcome. So actually we can divide the Four Noble Truths in the impure aspects, in the afflicted aspects, and in the pure aspects. So the impure aspects are true sufferings and the true origin of suffering, and the pure aspects are true cessation and true path. So the afflicted aspects are the first two, and the pure ones are the last ones. And so we also speak of them as cause and effect, although actually the cessation is permanent, so it's not really a result of the path. But we definitely can say that the first truth is the result of the second. So anyway, why do we, if the cause and effect relation between, for instance, true origin and true suffering is such that true origin is the cause of true suffering, why do we teach suffering first? And if likewise, if true path are responsible for the true cessations, if they're responsible for the attainment of true cessations, why do we not teach that which precedes it first? So actually we should have to teach true origins first and then teach true suffering. We should mention the true path first and then the true cessation later on. But as it says in the Uttara Tantra by Maitreya, it's like recognizing a disease. First you recognize the disease and then the cause of the disease in order to understand what is the medicine, to understand that the disease can be eliminated by way of taking certain medicine. So Rinpoche explains it now. If a person is sick, first they feel like, I'm not really sick. But then every year they go to the hospital. So at some point there's something not okay. Maybe the doctor diagnoses some symptoms saying, oh, there's something not okay. So that's just like suffering, recognizing suffering. So what is the cause? So, for instance, having eaten the wrong food or whatever was the actual origin of that suffering, the main cause. So you need to know what is the main cause of these symptoms. So you start to analyze, you start to investigate what is responsible for these different symptoms. And once you do that, then you work towards overcoming whatever problem there is. You start to analyze, is it possible? You examine, can I actually eradicate these symptoms and by way of eliminating its causes? And you come to the understanding, yes, I can. That is like the true cessation. And then true path is like, okay, now undergoing treatment, undergoing the necessary treatment, eating certain foods, exercising and so forth. And at some point, you'll be so happy because you understand, well, the true cessation is possible because there's a path. Therefore, first you have true cessations. It's possible. You'll be so happy. Why? Because there's medicine. There's true path. So you need to take medicine. You need to do exercise. You need to look after your health, in other words. Therefore, the method, the means to overcoming the kind of disease is the fourth aspect that is taught, or the fourth truth. So first, likewise here, first we need to understand their suffering. Then we need to understand where it comes from. What is the origin of our suffering? Then you understand, is it possible to gain the cessation, to attain the cessation of suffering? And lastly, you understand that there's a true path by way of which you can actually attain true cessation. So the realization of emptiness, of selflessness. On the basis of that direct realization, you can actually overcome karma and afflictions, and in that way overcome suffering. So this is like the example of a disease, identifying a disease, its causes, and identifying the possibility of overcoming the disease and so forth. So by way Therefore, it's like how we practice it. The order, the sequence of the Four Noble Truths is presented from the point of view of our own practice. First, understanding true suffering and so forth. It's not set forth from the point of view of their causal relationship, one being cause, one being the result. So this is the first answer to the question. And the next question is with regard to the Four Noble Truths in relation to Tantra. What are the Four Noble Truths in relation to Vajrayana or Tantrayana? So we talk about 4 classes of Tantra: Action Tantra, Performance Tantra, and so forth. So here we can definitely, with regard to each class, we can talk about the Four Noble Truths. But in general, when we talk about we say, for instance, that it's possible in terms of purity, we can practice the lower stages, the lower classes, but in terms of purity, it's not enough to practice the lower classes of Tantra. We have to practice the highest Yoga Tantra in terms of purity. So when we talk about these 4 levels, birth, death, and the Pado, so it's all in relation to contaminated karma and afflictions. So, for instance, we're born in relation to that, or in dependence on karma and afflictions. We die because of those. And there's also this intermediate state between death and being reborn. That is kind of suffering. Therefore, that is suffering. So these stages of birth, intermediate state, death, and so forth, these are all true sufferings. That's the first truth there. The first truth, therefore. And now, what is the origin? Now, first of all, when we talk about the true path, going towards talking about the 4th, here we take these stages of death, intermediate state, and rebirth into the path. So we take, this is something you do on the generation stage and also on the completion stage. So the ordinary death is transformed into the Dharmakaya, ordinary intermediate state is transformed into the Sambhogakaya, and ordinary birth is transformed into the Nirmanakaya. But this being practiced actually on not just on the generation stage, but also on the completion stage. But the actual practice happens on the highest level of the completion stage, where you actually attain, the subtle clear light mind at the time of death. That transforms into the Dharmakaya. Then the intermediate state becomes the illusory body, and eventually the Sambhogakaya. And then you have your rise then as the Nirmanakaya. So we talk about the different obscurations, afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations. But with regard to cognitive obscurations, it's actually with regard to the appearance. It's the aspect of the appearance of inherent existence that is described as the cognitive obscurations. Of course, the Svatantrika would say it's the grasping at true existence. However, in the Prasangika school, we speak about this subtlest kind of obscuration of the appearance, but in Tantra it's slightly different. So this is actually from the Sutric point of view. So we talk about the white appearance, the mind of white appearance, the mind of red increase, the mind of black near attainment. Those are described also as obscurations, as subtler types of minds. So these are all have the aspect of the appearance of inherent existence, and they are therefore also cognitive obscurations, subtle cognitive obscurations that need to be eliminated in order to attain Buddhahood, but they cannot be eliminated in dependence on the Sutric path. Therefore, in the Tantric path, you need to describe a very special true path, special path in terms of a special antidote that can overcome these coarser types of minds that still have the appearance of inherent existence. So a mind that is able, that can eliminate the subtlest cognitive obscurations, which the Sutric path, the Sutric techniques are not able to do. And on the basis of that, once you eliminate these subtle states of cognitive obscurations, then you attain the cessation, which is typical for the Vajrayana, or the Tantric, for the Tantric system. For instance, in the Kala Chakra, we talk about that time, the wheel of time. So it's the external wheel of time, the internal wheel of time, the secret wheel of time, So external, there's the external world. So it's the external, it's the internal, and the other wheel of time. So, for instance, when we talk about the external planets and so forth, all these, they affect us, these planets, these stars and so forth, they are all true sufferings, and they also actually affect our body, etc. So I don't need to go into much detail, but of course it's also the subtle energy in our body and so forth that affect us. So anyway, the point is that these are all the results of karma and afflictions, the external world. And in the end, we talk about the Four Noble Truths. And then with regard the internal, so being, as just described, the subtle winds and so forth. And then you have the other wheel of time, the other wheel of time. So you have the external, the internal, those are all the first two truths. And then with regard to the other wheel of time, it refers to the stage, the generation stage and the completion stage of Tantra, which includes, therefore, the true cessations and the true path. Therefore, even in Tantra, in Kala Chakra, you also have that explanation. And then in Dzogchen, with regard to Dzogchen, the next question is, Rinpoche says we talk about the actually the 9 yanas, or the 9. So the first are the three of the origin of suffering, the 3 of the ascetic practices, and the highest 3. So with regard to one person, it's possible that they have to go through all 9 yanas. And then others, there are others who just need some aspects of these yanas, that only have to go through some of these yanas. So for instance, the Shravaka is the first of these 9 yanas, the Shravaka yana. Here you have the Four Noble Truths described. And then with regard to the Pratyeka Buddhayana, you have the 12 links. And then with regard to the Bodhisattva yana, which is the third of the 9 yanas, it describes bodhicitta, it describes great compassion and so forth. So for some beings, they need to first generate the Shravaka yana, then there's Sambhogaka yana, the Pratyeka Buddhayana, and then the Bodhisattva yana. So first one needs to, some beings, it's important to first undergo the Hinayana path. It's impossible without entering the Hinayana path first to generate great compassion and so forth. So first they have to understand cyclic existence, and they understand the Four Noble Truths, understand the 12 links and so forth, just in relation to themselves. So for them it's necessary to generate self-liberation initially, so to overcome samsara for themselves on the basis of the 12 links and so forth. And then only then, once they've done that, then they're able to enter the Bodhisattva path and practice as a Bodhisattva. Can we then, only in relation to those first 3 yanas, which are on the sutric level, can we attain liberation? Can we attain bodhicitta? Buddhahood? No. No, we cannot. Why? Well, what is it in the sutric path? You only have the true method and wisdom assisting each other. You don't have a union of method and wisdom. So the wisdom realizing emptiness and bodhicitta, they're just assisting one another. So method and wisdom are not unified. So we need to unify method and wisdom. So for that, therefore, you need something else. So you need the highest 3 yanas, which is Anu Yoga, Maha Yoga, and Ati Yoga. Those 3 levels you need. So without understanding them, without practicing them, you cannot practice Dzogchen. So Lama Tsongkhapa also says that. In order for the... So Lama Tsongkhapa has said, so here it talks about Tibet. So here in Tibet, if you want to go to Buddhahood, so you have the Sutric path and the Tantra path, but they're as different as sun and moon. They're totally different, those two. So the Sutric and the Tantric path, they have a great difference between them. So Tantra is much greater. It's much greater than the Sutric path in terms of the techniques. Therefore, So a person who's got enough wisdom, they should understand how precious Tantra is, in the sense that, so if someone has interest in that, so to really understand that this is the highest path, and so to understand that there's such a difference, this is what it says in the sutra. It's important. We need to understand what is the difference between sutra and tantra. Also in relation to the lower classes of tantra, what is the difference between the lower classes and the highest yoga tantra? That is important to understand this again and again. So if we understand, but actually to understand highest yoga tantra, we need to know the three lower classes of tantra. So on the basis of that, then, so therefore, this is exactly what this quote is also saying, that we need to study first. So we need to understand these three lower classes to then get a full understanding of highest yoga tantra, and those are then the last three yanas. So the middling yanas are the three lower classes of tantra. So the fourth until the sixth yana, those are the three lower classes of tantra, and then you have the three highest yoga levels of tantra. So here we talk about Anu Yoga, Maha Yoga, and Ati Yoga. Now, can we right away generate Dzogchen? No, we need to first meditate on. We need to first. So first from the three lower classes of Tantra, we need to go through them, practice them, and then you need Anu Yoga, Maha Yoga, and Ati Yoga. Anu Yoga is the generation stage, then Maha Yoga is the completion stage of an ordinary person, and then here it's important to generate the empowerments, to gain the empowerments and so forth, and then based on that, being able to gain experience, that is, gain control over the channels in the body, the winds, the drops, and so forth. Only then can you proceed on the path. So the course mind. So the course mind needs to go first, so to practice on the basis of that. So that is like the Maha Yoga of the completion stage of an ordinary person, and then you have Ati Yoga, which is Dzogchen, which is the advanced stage. That is the completion stage of an Arya person. So on that basis, you do not abide in the coarse minds, but you only abide in the subtler mind, in the subtlest innate clear light mind. So at that time, the coarser types of minds, they have gone, they're no longer active, and it's that innate mind of clear light that arises. So this is on the basis of that level of Dzogchen. This is when you can totally practice, you gain control of this innate clear light mind. So therefore, you can apply this, therefore, the Four Noble Truths, you can apply them on the basis of these 9 yanas. If you understand these 9 yanas, you also gain an understanding of, in particular, the last 2 truths of the Four Noble Truths. So here, when we talk about the Prasangika view, here we can also distinguish with regard to the 16 aspects. So the Sergis Jetsun here talks about coarser and subtler types of 16 aspects. So impermanence here is the same. Here with regard to the, for instance, the Svatantrika, the different tenet systems, there's no difference. But here, empty, selfless, cause, origin, suffering, all those have different coarseness and subtleties. So how is the difference? What is the difference between them? So for instance, when we talk about the mind that perceives the self-sufficient substantially existent person, on the basis of that, all sorts of afflictions arise. So that's a coarse type of selfless. And then with regard to perceiving not just that, but perceiving even the subtler, perceiving a person that exists inherently by way of its own characteristics, on the basis of those, the afflictions that arise from that, they're subtler. So we distinguish between coarser and subtler kinds of minds that give rise to certain afflictions. Therefore, we distinguish between the suffering that arises from these different perceptions with these coarser misperceptions. So the suffering that arises from this coarser misperception is a coarser type of suffering, and the suffering that arises from the subtler misperception, that gives rise to a subtler kind of suffering. So likewise here, we also talk about the 5 aggregates from the Dzogchen point of view. We can go back to that and speak about, for instance, the subtle channels in the body and so forth. So these are actually a little coarser. So we talk about a coarse body, that is the very coarse body we can see. Then the subtler body, the channels, the winds and so forth. And then the very subtle, the very subtle body. So when you attain the clear light mind that has overcome the mind of white appearance and so forth. So here you can apply this, that the mind of the white appearance, of red increase and of black near attainment, those are the truth of suffering. And you become. And so the kind of aggregates, therefore, any kind of coarser aggregates, for instance, other than the mind of clear light, well, or the subtle winds that go along with the any clear light mind. So these are described as the truth of suffering. And then you have the path of the clear light mind, and together with the subtle winds and so forth. So these are seen as antidotes. So when we say Dzogchen in particular, so here the awareness is the mind of clear light, which realizes emptiness, and that's a very subtle mind. And based on the mind that, therefore, because it's so subtle, therefore its cessation is also much subtler. So in the Guya Samanja, it talks also about the mind of white appearance and so forth, these coarser minds that precede the inner clear light mind. And these need to be overcome. And therefore that which is to be eliminated, which needs to cease. So in this way we can talk about the mind of clear light, that being so subtle and so forth. Anyway, so this is just Rinpoche's view on that, how you can apply this explanation to Tantra as well as to Dzogchen. So the next question is, well, are body and mind not separate? Because there's a strong relation between them. So it seems like mind and body influence each other, affect each other. Doesn't that therefore mean, since the body is physical, therefore the mind has to be physical? So the body being a coarse physical entity and the mind being a subtler physical entity? So it's something very beautiful. I would like to say that the body, speech, and mind of a Buddha are of one nature. So actually, so here when we speak of the inner clear light mind and so forth, it's described as the mind, and then also the subtle winds that go along that arise as the body of a Buddha. Well, they're therefore inseparable. So when the body and the mind, so body, speech, and mind, in particular body and mind of the Buddha, if they are of one nature, then its cause must also be of one nature. So during the path, so for instance, when we talk about Dzogchen, in Dzogchen you have the clear light mind, you have the pure awareness and so forth. And so from the Dzogchen point of view, here in Dzogchen you practice, for instance, you practice such that the mind and the body become of one nature. Or in the Sakya system, you have the unity of clarity and empty. In the Kagyu tradition, you have Mahamudra. In the Gelug tradition, you have the unity of great bliss and emptiness. So there are different ways in which you unify certain aspects. So therefore that's also described in the Guya Samaja scriptures and so forth, in the Tantric scriptures, where you bring those together. So, for instance, we can say it's so overwhelming what a Buddha is able to do. So on the tip of one's finger, you can have a mandala, you can have the Buddha, you can have all the deities. So on the tip of one finger, it is possible to have all three Buddhas of 3 times, so past, present, and future. You can have all the mandala and so forth. This is only possible to have all these Buddhas on the top of your finger because body and mind are of one nature. So actually, because my body and my mind are different, and because my body is coarse, I can only put my one finger on the other finger, so nothing else I can do. But because we have this very subtle wind, we have this subtle clear-light mind and so forth, and they are one nature. Therefore, from a sutric point of view, even from a sutric point of view, but in particular with regard to the tantric point of view, so in the Samantabhadra prayer, it is also mentioned, or in the Samantabhadra teachings, it's also mentioned that the winds and the mind are very much inseparable. But especially in the tantric system, you have this unity of two aspects of mind and the physical, the subtle mind, the subtle winds that give rise, therefore, then to the unity of mind and body of a Buddha. So anyway, with regard, we have different types of aspects. We have a coarse mind, a subtle mind, and a very subtle mind. We have a coarse body, a subtle body, and a very subtle body. So what is the coarse body? The coarse body is the body that we can see, that is made of bones and so forth. What is the subtle body? It is the channels, it's the drops, it's the winds. And what is the subtlest body? It's the subtle wind energy that goes along with the mind of clear light. So sometimes in the West they talk about energy, so wind is a little difficult. The subtlest kind of wind that goes along with the subtlest type of mind, that energy, that is the energy which gives rise to the body of a Buddha. So it's kind of like wind energy or energy, whatever you want to call it. So at the time when we're even in samsara, we can distinguish between the mind, between the body that is coarse, subtle, and very subtle. Likewise with the mind, we distinguish between a coarse mind, a subtle mind, and a very subtle mind. So for instance, the 5 sense consciousnesses, they're coarse. Then the 80 conceptions, they're subtle. And then there's the mind of clear light, that is the very subtle mind. Therefore, the mind of clear light, when that is activated, then even within samsara, so the wind energy that is associated with the clear light mind, they're inseparable. They're one nature. So in that case, on that basis, you can say, with the subtle clear light mind and the wind that accompanies the clear light mind, since they are of one nature, well, therefore you can, on that basis, you are able to overcome the cognitive obscurations to then attain the state of a Buddha, whose mind and body are likewise of the same nature, because the substance that gave rise to the Buddha, the substantial cause that gave rise to the Buddha, that was also of one nature. But when with regard to the coarse body and the coarse mind, what is their relation? So previously with the subtle mind and the subtle wind, the subtlest mind and subtlest wind, well, they were of one nature. But actually with regard to the coarse body, well, our coarse body came from our parents. So the semen and the ovum of our parents, they gave rise to our body. You all know this. Science tells us that. You're all familiar with that. But did we only arise from our parents, from the ovum and the semen of our parents? No, we also needed consciousness. So the mind entered a fertilized ovum, and from then onwards, then we talk about birth, we talk about conception. So then the 12 links start to become active. So in week by week, we grow bigger, our limbs start to grow and so forth. So then at the time of death, when we die, our consciousness leaves the body again. So we don't say the person is still there, even though the body is still there, but the consciousness is gone. Therefore we say it's a corpse. We no longer talk of a person. That's why we apply this terminology, because at the time of conception, the consciousness enters the fertilized ovum, and so I say, I'm this, I'm a man, I'm a woman, and so forth, and we identify with that. There's a person now. But once at the time of death, the consciousness is gone, we never talk about a person. We no longer talk about a person. Therefore, there's definitely a reason for saying so. So, and when we are sick, for instance, when we get better after a disease, when we're very, very sick, we can definitely know that it affects our mind. It can also affect our mind, even if we're physically very sick. So, but if we don't know we're sick, for instance, so first we don't know, we're really happy, and then if someone tells us, oh, you have cancer, you're really sick, so right away we get really depressed, we get really unhappy. So there's definitely that relationship between mind and body. But if someone tells you it's no problem, So then, even if you have cancer but no one tells you, you'll be okay. Maybe you're a little worried for a while, but then you forget about it because no one told you how serious it is. So there's definitely a relationship between mind and body. I mean, you know something, you hear something, and it affects your mind. And nowadays, mind and life, there's these meetings that scientists have. So where Buddhists and scientific and modern scientists, they come together and they exchange their views, and they talk about also about neuroscience, about the effect of the brain on the mind and so forth. But how also by way of meditation and so forth, our thoughts can affect our brain and so forth. She says, I don't know this, but His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about it, that when we get angry or we overcome our anger, also, or when we're depressed, for instance, so when we have stress. So a lot of people who have, it's the right side that's a lot more active, apparently, when it comes to anger and depression and so forth. So its abilities actually degenerates. And then if on the other side, if you meditate on love and compassion and so forth, overcoming anger, etc., it's the other side. It's the other side of your brain. It's the left side of your brain that you use more with regard to positive aspects. Therefore, so in order to increase our immune system, so if we do these practices that help us to generate more love and compassion and so forth, then we will become healthier. So certain parts of our brain are affected and they affect our body. Therefore, this is what scientists say, that's what Buddhists tell us as well, that this is beneficial for us. Therefore, there's definitely this strong relation. So we can definitely say that they're strongly connected, but that doesn't mean that they're of one nature. And so here's the other question that was asked here. It's about that, like this person who's been sick and someone told her that this disease was affected by kind of spirits, that these, oh yeah, here it is. So here's about suffering. So a doctor told this person that her physical and mental problems are related to spirits, and these spirits need to be cared for, that need to be taken care of in some way. So from a Buddhist point of view, is there really such a connection between mental sickness, schizophrenia, for instance, and spirits? And am I responsible because of our actions and so forth? So anyway, Rinpoche says there are a lot of diseases that come from our own thoughts. There are a lot of mental problems because of our own thoughts, like discursive thoughts. And so these are questions, and so I have to answer here. Of course, there's no real reason, but this is like my opinion here. So there are some mental problems that arise. There are two problems, actually, two kinds of mental diseases. One that comes from our own thoughts because of our own worries and so forth. And so there's no relation to anything external, but it's really our own thoughts that we have to adjust our own thoughts. We need to modify them. But then there are other thoughts that, because of our karmic relation, that there's a strong connection to certain spirits, and they may actually affect us. That is a second type. So we may have a very unique relation to certain spirits. And so Rinpoche gives a quote here that seems to support that sometimes, so for instance, it's also said in the Bodhisattva Aryatara, so if another being harms me, then we should think that we've also done this, something similar to another person. We've harmed them, and now the harm at some point comes back to us and manifests via harm. Likewise, when people love us, it's again a result of karma. So it's possible, therefore, that some spirit beings, on the basis of this quote, we can actually know that there are spirit beings that can actually harm us. So therefore, in Buddhism, you find many different practices of overcoming spirits, some kind of rituals and so forth. Also in other, you have exorcisms and so forth. So this exists in other religions. So there's definitely some aspect. There's definitely disease that just comes, that has been caused by our own thoughts, and there are those caused by spirits, and then sometimes pujas are done. So there are certain like removing these obstacles, where you remove these obstacles. These all exist. So these problems, then these mental problems, have not just been caused by our own mind. It's because of our unique relationship with a certain spirit that we may suffer from that. So if you have three people, so if you, for instance, so if you kind of pollute water, it's possible because of this pollution of the water and because of the relation to certain spirit beings that you're affected by that. Because of that connection to a certain spirit being that also abides in that water, therefore you can be affected. And then in this case, just medication doesn't help, but you should also meditate on love and compassion as well as emptiness and the Four Noble Truths. That will help as well if you then meditate in such a way on this being and so forth. In Milarepa's biography, it also talks about it, that he was meditating. So he was meditating in such a way, he was leaning against a mountain, and in front of him was this rock wall. And in this rock, he saw some kind of ghost. He saw some kind of spirit being. He saw some scary formation. It was just he made it up in his mind. It's just from his own mind. So he saw every time he looked at this rock formation, he felt there's this being, and it really affected him. So at some point he thought there was this spirit being right next to him, and he was meditating on the meditative practices. He was doing all these practices. So he was doing all these deity yogas, but instead of the spirit being that he was right there in front of him, that he had this vision of, and becoming smaller, it became bigger and bigger, and it multiplied. And he said, this spirit being, he was laughing. He was laughing. You won't get rid of me by doing all these rituals. If you meditate on love and compassion and on emptiness, that's when I will go away. I will just become more if you try to do all these exorcism and all these pujas. It won't help. So Rinpoche, Milarepa, it helped him so much. He said, this is an advice he got from the spirit, that I should meditate on love and compassion and emptiness. That's an advice that's really helped my heart. It helped me in the center. I kept this advice at the center of my heart. I need to practice love and compassion on emptiness and so forth. That's when these harmful forces, they can be subdued. So this was very helpful. So this also shows that even with spirits and so forth, our mind is playing into it, suggesting this and suggesting that. So actually we should not be affected by that. It's important to meditate in such a way. Although there are, of course, kind of mental problems that are merely created by our thoughts, and those that also have some external aspect. Anyway, then emptiness, when the mind becomes calm and the more subtle consciousness becomes manifest, and one has the experience of an all-pervading presence, is that an experience of emptiness? So to have that this sense of like something being there that pervades everything, is that actual emptiness? Is that his experience of emptiness? So the Mahamudra, during the Mahamudra, or in the Mahamudra teachings, you have this explanation there. So that if you tie a knot, it becomes kind of. So if you have to untie that knot, so it's this entanglements of our mind that need to be let loose. So the mind needs to be so loose, like in a loosely relaxed way, without any discursive thoughts arising. So without thinking here and there, there should be this vacuity, so that only mere clarity and mere awareness arise to your mind. That is the Mahamudra meditation. So this is how it's described. So there are a lot of descriptions in the texts that describe it exactly like that, but that the mind's clarity and knowing or aware aspect, only that appears. So what is Mahamudra? What is Dzogchen? These two, I don't remember these exact words, but Milarepa himself has also talked about it in one of his songs of experience. So this non-dual mind, the non-inherent mind of non-duality, this clear light mind, that is Mahamudra. So this is as in like in Dzogchen, the Tibetan word means complete, great completion. So that is the great completion, that subtle mind of the clear light mind. So what is it really when we talk about Dzogchen or Mahamudra? It's that extremely subtle, innate mind of the clear light that realizes the lack of inherent existence, that is non-dual. That is great. That is the great completion or Dzogchen as well as Mahamudra. So when we talk about this, so we meditate by way of, initially we meditate on a non-destructive kind of mind. So in order to practice Tantra, in particular highest yoga Tantra, so actually from the Tantric point of view, it's all about the subtle clear light mind, the inner clear light mind. So in the Gelug system or even in the system of Marpa, so in the Guya Samaja, what happens is the winds enter the central channel. They enter, they abide, and they dissolve in the central channel. So then in the Hivaja or in the Heruka Tantra, here it's not done at the heart, but it's put through the practice of Tummo or inner heat. And then you have the practice. So in the Guya Samaja system, it's mainly entering the winds, for them entering, dissolving, and so forth. In Hivaja and Heruka, it is mainly based on Tummo or inner heat meditation, focusing on the navel and so forth, that you practice and generate the subtlest clear light mind. But in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, you focus on the mind. You focus on the mind, first the coarse mind, and slowly the mind becomes subtler and subtler, without having to practice with the winds and the drops and so forth, as described in Guya Samaja, for instance. But slowly the mind, after focusing single-pointedly and realizing the emptiness of the mind, you go subtler and subtler and manifest at some point the subtle clear light mind. So the different techniques to manifesting that subtlest innate mind. So first, as an ordinary person, when we meditate on Mahamudra and Dzogchen, first we have to overcome, we have to stop all these discursive thoughts, these minds, these expectations, worries, and so forth, but just identify the basic qualities of the mind, being clear and aware. And once we can do that, just single-pointedly focus on that, then slowly the mind will become subtler, and a subtler mind will manifest. And then we should apply our understanding of emptiness, of the lack of inherent existence. And with this mind, then you experience, you meditate on Dzogchen. But it doesn't mean like total vacuity, that nothing appears to the mind. That's not Dzogchen. That is not the practice of great completion or of these advanced practices. I don't think so. Just having no experience, having just a nothingness. And just this vacuity is also, I don't think it's the right view, just having nothing there. That is not enough. So actually, so there's danger that without relying on the different reasonings, that you have some kind of emptiness that is not the actual emptiness. So it's like an emptiness that is not real emptiness, but that just seems to be emptiness, has nothing to do with the lack of inherent existence. So actually we talk about emptiness from the point of view of the cause, of the result, and the entity. So the three doors of liberation, it's important to understand the lack of inherent existence, of a cause, of a result, of an entity. So then, if you understand that, those three doors of liberation, these three aspects of emptiness with regard to cause, effect, and entity, then you realize emptiness. Otherwise, you remain in samsara. So it's said, and also that you need hundreds of reasonings that enable you to understand emptiness. So if you, without applying any kind of analysis, and you just focus on some kind of nothingness, that's not emptiness. Panchen Losang Chokye also talks about. So if you do that, it's just a conventional aspect. So if you just focus on some kind of vacuity of the mind, that's the conventional aspect of the mind. That's not the emptiness of the mind. So it's important to really understand the actual emptiness by way of the different reasonings. So in this way, I've completed going through the different questions, and now I'll continue. So in a way, I've actually addressed everything I wanted to address. So what time is it? So we've got another hour left. So what am I going to talk about in that last hour, Rinpoche says? So I would like to talk about the following. The Buddha himself has the 3 wheels of Dharma. He turned the wheels of Dharma. First, the wheel of the Four Noble Truths, that's very well known. And then during the second wheel, was the framework really, was it the Four Noble Truths? Or the third wheel of Dharma, were the Four Noble Truths the framework on the basis of which the Buddha taught the second and the third wheel? Well, His Holiness always talks about the following. When the Buddha attained enlightenment, he remained for 49 days. He remained for 49 days in a state without teaching. So there's this sutric quote. It says, profound and peaceful, free from fabrications and uncompounded clarity. I found a Dharma that is like a nectar. Since when I teach it, they won't understand it. I will remain in this forest. So the first line is important. Profound and peaceful. That refers to what the Buddha taught is profound and peaceful, free from fabrications and uncompounded clarity. Those are words that describe actually emptiness. Those are words of emptiness that describe the lack of inherent existence of phenomena or ultimate truth. So here the Buddha is saying that that's the kind of Dharma that I found. So if I were to teach it to others, no one will understand that. That's why I'm going to remain in this forest without saying anything. So these were the words the Buddha himself taught at the very that the Buddha taught in this particular verse. But actually, these are the actual words of this text or this verse. But actually, His Holiness interprets this verse in a slightly different way. When it says profound and peaceful, it describes the first wheel of Dharma, the content of the first wheel, and free from fabrications, it describes the content of the second wheel of Dharma, and then uncompounded clarity, it describes the third wheel. So, for instance, the Tathagata Sutra and so forth, that's part of the third wheel of Dharma. So, here, in particular, the third wheel includes not just the sutric aspect of the third truth, but also the tantric teachings. So here's uncompounded clarity. So therefore, the Buddha taught all the teachings that the Buddha taught. So the sutric teachings in the form of the 3 wheels, as well as the tantric teachings that are part of the third wheel, they're all contained in this first line. So when did the Buddha, what profound and peaceful Dharma did he teach? He taught this is true suffering, this is the true origin, this is the true cessation, this is the true path. So in that way he taught a profound and peaceful Dharma, and he taught when you taught, for instance, the 4 aspects: impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless, he taught, therefore, the 4 aspects of true sufferings, he taught selflessness. So what did he teach? He taught it from the Shavaka point of view. So he taught the methods to overcoming samsara. So he taught the Four Noble Truths from the point of view of a person who wants to attain self-liberation. And then he taught, during the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma, he taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So what did he teach? He taught not just selflessness, but he also taught selflessness of person, but he also taught selflessness of phenomena. So during the first turning of the wheel, he taught mainly selflessness of person. But then during the second turning of the wheel, he also taught very extensively selflessness of phenomena. So in order to overcome cognitive obscurations, if he had just taught selflessness of person, that would have not been enough. It was important to teach, for the Buddha to teach during the second turning of the wheel, to teach the methods to Buddhahood, and therefore he taught emptiness very extensively by way of selflessness of person and selflessness of phenomena. And here, with regard to the true cessation and to the true path, so what you taught during the first turning wasn't as extensive as what you taught during the second turning with regard to the true cessation and the true path. So he taught not just the selfness of a person, but he also taught selfness as a phenomena very extensively, and taught how to overcome the true obscurations, how to eliminate the different obscurations in order to then attain the cessation, the appropriate kind of cessation, or the concordant cessation. Therefore, it became more extensive, the explanation of true cessation and true path during the second turning of the wheel was much more extensive. So during the first turning of the wheel, therefore, it's described as free from fabrication. So during this first turning, it was already profound and peaceful what he taught, the Four Noble Truths, in particular the last two truths. But here, with regard to the second turning of the wheel, he taught also the methods to overcoming cognitive obscurations, and they're free from fabrication. So therefore, as part of this quote, the first line, it says free from fabrications. And then, during the third turning of the wheel, so where he taught these different kind of sutras, Songgywancha Gyalpo and so forth, these other sutras. So at that time, he taught, for instance, with regard to emptiness, while the emptiness set forth is described in all wheels is the same. There's no difference. There's no coarser emptiness and subtler emptiness. So the lack of true existence from a Pasangika school point of view, there's no difference. So whether you say true existence or lack of true existence or lack of inherent existence, that is the subtlest kind of emptiness. So here, despite there not being any difference with regard to emptiness itself, the object of emptiness, there's a difference between the mind that realizes emptiness. There are different types of minds realizing emptiness, and there are coarser and subtler kinds of minds. So here we talk about the clear light from the point of view of the object, that's emptiness, and clear light from the point of view of the mind. That is the mind, clear and aware mind that realizes emptiness. So it says uncompounded clarity. So it's this clear light mind that's described as that is free from any kind of stains. In its nature are no stains there. The stains are all adventitious, and that is Buddha nature. That is the Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha nature. That can also be applied here. That can also be described here as this uncompounded clarity. So we talk about then basis, about a path and a result. So here we speak of, for instance, the path. We speak of the consciousness from the point of view of the basis, and then the path, and then we talk about the result. And in that way, you have the true origins, true sufferings, which are on the basis, our mind on the basis, and then you have the path, which are true path, and you have the result, which also includes the true cessation. So how is the Buddha's mind free from any kind of fabrications? So when we talk about Buddhism, studying Buddhism, so we get together to study the Dharma, and what is unique to the Dharma? It's that it's profound and peaceful and free from fabrication. So all sentient beings have Buddha nature, and all sentient beings have the potential to become Buddhas. So actually, all sentient beings have the enlightened activity of the Dharmakaya already. And also the fact that there's no difference between the emptiness of our mind and the emptiness of a Buddha. Therefore, there's another reason why we have Buddha nature. Our mind lacks inherent existence, and so forth. And from a tantric point of view, we can also understand that that's very subtle clear light mind, that we all have the subtle clear light mind that can become manifest, especially when it comes to this inner clear light mind. It's very important. That has great meaning. So right now, for instance, when we study sutra, when we practice the sutric path, we talk about the four bodies of a Buddha. So you have the Jnanakaya, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nimanakaya. So with regard to the Dharmakaya, we speak of a body that is free from the two impurities. So the natural impurity and the adventitious impurity. So if we really understand this, well, these two impurities, when we understand this actually takes us towards the clear light mind, to the Buddha nature, even on the, or especially on the tantric level. So what is this Buddha nature that is actually free from these impurities? It is this clear light mind that is not affected by any obscurations. It's totally clarity. It's naturally clear. So sometimes we say that this mind is actually already Buddha, that the mind's nature is being a Buddha. So sometimes we find this explanation in the scripture, so that the Buddha is already in the Dharmakaya, it already exists within us. So we're already kind of natural Buddhas and so forth. And once we eliminate the obscurations, that's when we again become enlightened. So this terminology you find in some of the scriptures. So where does it come from? What's the basis for that? It's because the subtle clear light mind that is not affected by the afflictive emotions, by contaminated karma and so forth. It's not affected in any way by those. So it says, for instance, the Uttara Tantra, that the mind's nature is clarity, and that it's adventitious, that obstructions are adventitious. So it's like just as water. It says in the scriptures, it says that just as water in its actual nature is not affected by the mud. So for instance, if you have like muddy water, so you can't drink it, of course, right away because it's polluted, but actually that actual nature of the water, the H2O, so the actual structure of the water, so we will talk about pure water purifier and so forth. So we have these new kind of machines so that purify the water, so you can actually separate. I don't know how long it takes to purify the water, but actually you can clear the water from all the mud, from all the impurities, and can drink clean water. That means that therefore the mud or whatever impurities were in the waters, they were not in the nature of the water, because otherwise you couldn't drink the purified water that is just pure water. You can actually separate them. So therefore this clarity of water, this purity of the water is never affected by the mud. Likewise, our mind is just like that. Our mind is not affected. So just as the water is not affected by the mud, likewise our mind, our afflictive emotions and so forth, our misperception, etc., they do not affect the nature of our mind. Our mind is actually completely pure. This is what Nagarjuna has always said. Nagarjuna has said that just as clear water is not affected by the mud, or just as water is not actually, the nature of water is not affected by impurities, likewise our mind is not affected in terms of its nature. Therefore, so if we go to buy groceries, for instance, we need to have a purse. Without a purse, without some money, we cannot buy groceries. We have no capital. If we have a capital in our pockets, oh, I can buy this, I can buy that, and so forth. So we can actually go to a store. So likewise, in order to attain enlightenment, if we wonder, can I attain enlightenment? We need some capital. Yes, we have a capital because our mind is not in the nature of the afflictions. They are just adventitious. They are temporary. They can be removed. So that's like our capital. Our mind is temporarily only affected by wrong perceptions, but they can be eliminated by way of an antidote, by way of attaining the right perception of phenomena, by cultivating that. We can overcome these wrong views by generating the right view, and on the basis of that, we can actually become enlightened, because all these obstructions are not in the nature of our mind. Therefore, it's clear in the different sutras that are part of the third wheel of Dharma, the Tathagata Garbha Sutra and Sungye Wancho Gyalpo Shubudo and so forth. So all these different texts, it's very clear in there that the mind has this clear nature, that it's not in the obscurations are not in the nature of our mind, but that we're bound by these afflictions temporarily, and we can, once we attain the path, path of seeing, the path of meditation, and go through the different levels, the 10 grounds and so forth, we can eliminate these obscurations. So step by step, we can, because of the natural purity of our mind, we can overcome the adventitious impurities. And on the basis of that, we attain the Svabhavakaya. We attain the Munich in Tibetan, or the nature body, or Svabhavakaya. What is the Svabhavakaya? It's that body that is free from impurities, from natural and adventitious impurity. So in the Sutric system, we say that the Svabhavakaya is permanent. But from a tantric point of view, when you talk about the body, you say the Svabhavakaya has two aspects, a permanent and an impermanent Svabhavakaya, or nature body. So when we say the nature of the clear light mind, because it's mind, that is the impermanent. So its nature, it's emptiness, and that is the permanent nature. So this is how it's described in the highest Yoga Tantra. So when we talk about the inner clear light mind, well, that's not described in the Sutric path. So therefore, you don't have the two types of Svabhavakaya. You don't have the two types of nature body, permanent and impermanent, because you don't have a clear light mind. Anyway, the point is that during the first turning of the wheel, the Buddha described the Four Noble Truths, but he described them even more extensively during the second turning of the wheel. He described it even more extensively, and during the third turning of the wheel, he also described the mind, and in particular realizing emptiness. He described the subtler types of minds, and in particular also the tantric teachings are all part of the third turning of the wheel, and in that context he also taught the subtlest clear light mind. So on the basis, of course, of the Four Noble Truths. In that way, the Four Noble Truths are contained in all teachings of the three wheels, Sutric and Tantric teachings. So if we talk about the practice, our practice, so for instance, at the end of the practices that are common to a person of middling aspiration, it says at the very end that all teachings have a connection. The Four Noble Truths are the basis of all teachings. So we need to understand this relationship between all the different aspects of the path, that they're all connected to the Four Noble Truths. That's important to understand. So sometimes we can actually describe the Lamrim teachings, we can describe them on the basis of the Four Noble Truths. Or we can take the 12 links and take them as a basis, and then explain the practices that are common to a person of small aspiration, middling aspiration, and the person of great aspiration. So we can in that way also describe the Four Noble Truths, or the 12 links, a more extensive version. And Gamboa, for instance, who was Gampopa, he was the disciple in his text, Ornament for Liberation. He also talked about he brought together or the Kadamba teaching and the Mahamudra teachings together, and he taught this unique kind of way of teaching, of bringing the two together. So the Mahamudra as well as the Lamrim in his ornament of jewel ornament of liberation. So in any way he taught all this based on the capital. So we have this capital, we have already everything there. So whether you talk about the Lamrim, can you generate Mahamudra on the basis of the different stages of the Lamrim, so the person of lower, of middling, and greater spiritual aspiration and so forth, all this, yes, you can. So first for instance, in the jewel ornament for liberation, the Gampopa first taught Buddha nature in order to show this. And whereas Lama Tsongkhapa, where he started, for instance, with the relying on the spiritual guide. So there's different topics that are taught first, with Gampopa teaching Buddha nature first, Lama Tsongkhapa teaching how to rely on a spiritual guide. Anyway, So, whatever it is, but the point is that the Four Noble Truths and the 12 things are all the framework. This is because it's taught in particular when you teach about the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras, for instance, when you study Prajna. As a result, the topics that are described there are all based on the Four Noble Truths. So it's said, therefore, that the past Buddhas have also attained enlightenment on the basis of the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras. Those in the present and those in the future, they will all attain enlightenment on the basis of the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras. So when we say the Perfection Sutras, the Mother Sutras, the 100,000, the extensive, the middling, and the short Perfectional Wisdom Sutras of 100,000 verses and so forth, they all include the teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, and so forth. So it's like they're like a meadow full of flowers. So in other words, the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras, they describe all the different like flowers of the Dharma, whereas the Lamrim kind of sets forth a certain sequence on the basis of which you become enlightened. So it's just a different style of teaching. So in the Lamrim, you have all the stages set forth in accordance with a certain sequence that should not be mistaken and so forth. Anyway, so when we talk about following the stages of the path, so we're actually, when we study the Lamrim, when we practice the Lamrim, we practice the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras. They're not separate, they're not different. So with regard to so it's just the sequence is set forth in a certain, the sequence is set forth and it's like certain practices are taught first and so forth. That's why we call it Lamrim, or the stages of the path to enlightenment. But they contain everything, the scriptures of the Perfectional Wisdom Sutra, the Madhyamika scriptures, everything is attained. Everything is contained in them. So this is what His Holiness also always says, that it's like the Kadam Shumba way. So it's this part of the Kadamba tradition with regard to the scriptures. So this is something that you probably also know, that when you study the Lamrim, for instance, the practices of the person of middling aspiration, they don't talk about the 10 grounds and so forth. It doesn't describe really the practices of the Mahayana. So it talks about the Four Noble Truths and so forth. So only at the end, and during the third part of the Lamrim, then you talk about, then you describe, you have the different topics of bodhicitta and so forth, but the 10 grounds are also not really described. So actually they're mainly contained in the Perfectional Wisdom Sutra, in the explicit meaning. And so once you study this, then you go back to the Lamrim and you realize it's actually contained in there. It's indicated in there, although it's not obvious. So really, it's important to study the Lamrim on the basis of the knowledge of the Perfectional Wisdom Sutras, knowledge of Prajna, knowledge of Madhyamika and all that. Only then can you truly understand the Lamrim. And likewise also for the tantric practices, you need the Lamrim as a foundation. So that's very important. So that's all I've got to say, really. It's half an hour before the end of our session here together. What I wanted to say is done. So there's nothing really left to say. So your questions, I talked about the Dzogchen, about the different aspects, about the 16 aspects and so forth. I've addressed all that. All I got left to say is thank you. Is it okay to leave it at that? So I think it's enough for today. I've finished what I wanted to say. Oh, this is in preparation for the mandala offering. Vajra ground, mighty golden ground. Om Vajra fence, Ahum. Outside it is encircled by the surrounding wall, in the center of which are Sumeru, King of Mountains, the eastern continent Vidya, the southern Jambudvipa, the western Vidania, the northern Kuru, Vidya and Vidya, Kamara and Upper Kamara, Sata and Upper Manchin, Kuru and Kaurawa, the precious mountain, the wish-granting tree, the wish-fulfilling cow, the unclouded harvest, the precious wheel, the precious jewel, the precious queen, the precious minister, the precious elephant, the precious horse, the precious general, and the great treasure vase. Lady of grace, lady of garlands, lady of song, lady of dance, lady of flowers, lady of incense, lady of lamps, and lady of perfume. The sun and the moon, the precious parasol, and the banner of victory in all quarters. In the center, the most perfect riches of gods and human beings, with nothing missing, pure and delightful. To my glorious, holy, and thus kind root and lineage groups, and in particular to the deity host of Lama Tsongkhapa, king of sages, Aryatara, and their divine retinue, I shall offer these as a Buddha field, and in particular to the venerable, gloriously good Jhado Rinpoche, as a thanks offering for your kindness, in that we have received a profound discourse on the great, profound Mahayana teachings from you. Please accept them with compassion for the sake of migrating beings. Having accepted them to me and all migrating mother sentient beings as far as the limits of space, out of your great compassion, please grant your inspiration. The short mandala is ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, and the sun and the moon. Imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Request to turn the wheel of Dharma, O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom. Please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Send forth this jewel mandala to your precious Guru. First Tibetan and then English. Through this virtue, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and place all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that's not arisen rise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. So the long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. And the short long life prayer for Lama Zopa Rinpoche. You who uphold the subduers in our way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunat's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, savior of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Das Langlebensgebet für the long life prayer for His Eminence Jhado Rinpoche. May the Buddha Dharma flourish and its upholders have long lives. May all sentient beings rise into happiness and their temporal and ultimate goals be fulfilled. Thank you. So this is the director of the center, I believe, Clara, who wants to say a few words of thanks.
Okay. Dear Rinpoche,
Dear Rinpoche.
I would like to thank you very much for your great teaching. Since the best way to thank the teacher is to implement his instructions, we will all strive to do so. Very much we would like to invite you again so that you will visit Aryatara Institute very soon again and hopefully very often. In this way we can further develop our Dharma connection with you. So we want to thank you by... Thank you. Thank you very much. We have done a special offering. Then we would also like to thank our teacher who is in the retreat now, Venerable Theodore, who inspired us to invite you. Many thanks to all, also to Geshe-ma for her excellent translation, without which we would not have followed your teaching. And also many thanks to Venerable Broma and her translation into German. Many thanks also to our technical team with Hermann, Harald, and Alexis. They solved the challenge of simultaneously translation via Zoom. And this was an absolute premiere. Thank you very much. It was really a challenge. Thanks also to all the volunteers. And we would also like to thank all the participants. And of course, especially Ken Rinpoche, who honored us with his visit. Thank you. Whoever would like to can now come forward with a katak and thank Rinpoche. Those who would like to support the Aryatara Institute can do so with a donation. Here in the center with a transfer or via our donation button on our webpage for the Zoom participants. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, bitte.
So everyone's got the
Ihr könnt
opportunity to
alle mit
offer
eurem
kata.
Katak nach vorne kommen, euch bedanken und wenn ihr was darbringen wollt, könnt ihr das dann auch überreichen.
So it's the first time that I came to Munich, to the center here, and so that all of this has worked out really well. You've all organized it really well by way of the internet, for instance, to have these teachings. So this has all been really well organized, and I've been able to. So the way I've hoped to, it's all been accomplished. So I want to thank all of you. So that that's been translated to English, that Venerable Droma translated into German. So I want to especially thank all of you who made this possible. And so, having seen everyone here, having met everyone, so there are some elder people, there are some younger people, so all of you. So I'm really happy. I rejoice in all your efforts and what you've done to make this possible. And I hope in the future that you will continue to study, reflect, and meditate, to be able to become scholars and generate understanding, love, and accomplishment, so that you will help the Dharma in that way. In particular, in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's center, the FPMT center here, that has been established in accordance with the Dharma, that you will be able to continue with these great teachings and continue this lineage and help society, serve society. And in that way, it's important to help other sentient beings by way of our own practice. So it helps with other sentient beings, our relationship, our own, it will increase our better our own life, lead to more happiness and well-being for ourselves and others. And so it will increase, our society will increase, as it says in the scriptures, it will improve in such a way. So please keep this in your mind and take personal responsibility for that. So thank you. That's what I wanted to say.